Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Friday, November 12th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Purdue game is tomorrow, the game against Michigan in 15 days. We've spent the last couple of mornings talking about questions surrounding the Buckeye offense and letting you hear directly from the Ohio State coaching staff. Today, we're going to hear directly from Buckeye Scoop's X's and O's guru to get his take on what's actually happening there. His name is Ross Fulton. He joins me now. Ross, thank you for being here.
Happy to, Tom.
So there were several issues that the Buckeyes had at Nebraska that I feel like we kind of saw in the game at Penn State against Penn State as well. You know, struggling to run the ball, struggling in the red zone, not hitting a lot of big plays. So was Nebraska throwing some of the same looks at the Buckeyes that Penn State did? And if so, is that something I would assume they're probably going to see again this weekend against Purdue?
Yeah, I think it was very similar. To me, I'm sure the coaching staff charts it very much depending on like where Ohio State's tight end was aligned, particularly. When he was in certain spots that suggested runs, they would tend to put an extra guy in the box, play a lot of cover one or cover three, single high schemes. When he was detached or in passing situations, they would then sort of play a softer zone to try to keep everything in front of them. And then a ton of, again, slanting up front to try to cause confusion in the Ohio State offensive line. And since that continues to be successful, I would assume that every opponent will continue to do that and play those games up front going forward.
Yeah, and the issues up front were, there were a multitude of them. There was not a short section of your article this week about, some of the issues. One of them was blockers not being able to get to the second level. And that's something I'm pretty sure we've talked about that before, but for people who maybe don't know or don't remember, can you briefly explain what it means to have blockers get to the second level and why it's a big problem when it doesn't happen?
Yeah, and all that just means is getting on to linebackers. And so, especially in their Ohio State's base, zone scheme, particularly stretch, everyone is, laterally stepping to the play side. So if they're running to the right, everyone's stepping to the right. And the goal is to get combo blocks between two offensive linemen on a defensive lineman, and then one of those offensive linemen comes off onto the linebacker. And what's happening too often is that Ohio State offensive linemen are getting what I would say is stuck on a defensive lineman instead of following their zone track rules. And so, if someone's slanting away from them, they'll keep chasing them, even though it's like you got to give that guy up, let your teammate pick him up and get up to the second level. Or like conversely, if he's slanting into you, or behind you away from the play, they're like blocking back on him instead of, again, like following their rules. So a lot of it is like not so much, you hear lots of people talk about like they're not firing off the ball, they're not creating movement, like sort of these catchphrases. It's really much more, I would say, of a mental issue right now than a physical one. For the most part, where they just need to be more disciplined in their zone track, and they need to work more in coordination to identify looks and figure out who needs to do what and communicate.
And to you, are those issues just kind of inexperience, and you can take that as young players or guys who just haven't worked together that much before? I mean, they have shuffled guys all around that line, and we always hear about the importance of cohesion in the offensive line and gelling together and working as a unit. Do you view that as something that might be playing into some of those issues right now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a strange situation where they have guys with lots of experience, but because they did the musical chairs in the preseason and moved everyone around, like no one is a second year starter at the current position they're playing. It's a lot of like Nicholas Petit Frere has had a rough couple of weeks, for instance. I mean, I think Brian Day mentioned after the game, he missed some practice. So presumably he's banged up as well, but moving from left tackle to right tackle and left tackle again is difficult. Again, similarly, like Thayer Munford going from guard to tackle and back, you just don't have the cohesion. You have a very young center who you hopefully, Luke Whippler, you tend to rely on your center a lot of times to help identify what's going on up front in terms of the blocking scheme. And then you also have a young quarterback who also in Ryan Day's system is in charge of that. And so a lot of the youth, you can't do anything about what DeJuan Jones eating a bad chicken biscuit breakfast sandwich or whatever he did before the Nebraska game. So injuries and illnesses happen and the like, but they would definitely be well served by having 5 guys playing at the same position throughout a game and working together.
During the game, there were a lot of questions about Ohio State's balance, and I will put my hand up and say, yes, I was one of the people asking about that, because we've heard Ryan Day talk all about, wants to be balanced on offense and doesn't want to be too pass heavy. And they had been pretty, he had acknowledged they were too pass heavy in the past. It certainly looked to anyone watching the game or looking at the stat sheet like, yep, they were very pass heavy again. But then earlier this week, Day and Kevin Wilson said a lot of those passes were RPO calls rather than specifically called pass plays. So is CJ Stroud making the right decision in most of those cases from what you saw? And if so, is that something that defenses are going to continue to try and dictate, just putting them in, if it's in those situations, playing the run, making Ohio State beat them with the pass?
So, yeah, as we talked about, Ryan Day talked about it this week. And if teams are going to outnumber you in the box, you basically have one of three ways you can deal with it, at least have an effective play. You can read the guy for a run play. You can try to put additional blockers in the box but the defense can always match that, right? If you put 7 in, they can put 8, they can put 9, or you can run a run pass option. And obviously, they did run CJ Stroud a little bit on Saturday. I think that'll be a small component, but he's not like a big run threat, even if you do it. But he is very good at those RPOs because he's pretty quick getting the ball out on those intermediate routes. And so, Saturday was really the first time that they leaned into doing those. You'd see them sporadically, but like that was by far and away a more significant chunk of the game plan. And so, the hope is as you throw those, teams have to start being more honest guarding them, particularly when you get Garrett Wilson back, who can turn those into explosive plays, force the backside linebackers or overhangs to stay home, and then you can hand off. So you may call the same play, but your ultimate run pass balance on your run sheet looks more balanced. And so because those 8, I counted 8 RPOs, at least that Stroud through, if those turn into run plays, then that changes things around. And so you have, I think they need to keep doing it, as Day talked about earlier this week. They can't do it every play because their base run play is stretch or wide zone. They like running that from the pistol. And when you do that, the quarterback has to turn his back. So it can't be everything. You got to keep doing bootlegs and other play actions that make defenders stay home. But I do think that will have to continue to be a component of the Ohio State offense.
Dane Wilson this week also talked about what they call long handoffs. That's a term I know I've heard you use on these shows before, but they talked about it this week. Also screens, how they kind of count those in the run game as well, even though they're passes. So, but I guess the question that I have was, do those really accomplish the same things as a run, or is it, is that tougher when you get into the red zone and then things are a little more compressed? So it's like it's a run, but it doesn't necessarily do everything a run might do for you.
Yeah, and again, it depends what kind of screen we're talking about, right? So if you're talking about like those quick wide receiver screens, those again are an extension of the run game. So yeah, so we talk about RPOs. Those are an RPO. They're technically called reliefs because a lot of times like CJ Stroud will read it pre-snap and decide whether to throw it based on like counting the numbers and the leverage of the defensive back on the wide receiver. As opposed to say like a slower developing screen to Travion Henderson, which they're also doing. It's a way to get him the ball in space. I would consider that more of the pass game. But I agree. I mean, it's when you get in the red zone and bodies are, especially the low red zone inside the 10 where like bodies are condensed, you obviously have less room for those kind of screens. And so that's where, again, you can do it, but it puts a premium on getting the ball, either bringing in more bodies to block, especially if you're not going to run the quarterback, which they are doing, especially in those situations. Or, you saw them against Nebraska, for instance, like getting that like heavy personnel, and then Stroud did that sprint out throw to Olave as the single receiver. Or, you gotta also be able to pass the ball in those tight situations. And so, again, there was a couple on Saturday, that 3rd and 2 that Stroud missed Jackson Smith and Njigba that led to a field goal. He ran like a little pivot route and he was open, like you got to hit those. And so it just puts a premium on being accurate and standing in there on the quarterback. And if the quarterback's not going to be a run threat, you need more out of him as a passer.
All right. Two more plays I wanted to ask you about specifically. You wrote about the lack of big plays on Saturday and how that kind of impacted Ohio State and how Stroud has kind of struggled throwing the ball down the field at times. One example was that 4th-and-1 play pretty early in the game to Jeremy Ruckert. So that was something that Day and Wilson talked about a little bit this week. But what did you see on that play?
Yeah, and so again, I know people have been critical of that. I thought it was a good play call. Again, like teams are loading the box in those short yardage situations. So like people complained the week before when they didn't make it against Penn State. So like you only have you gotta be able to throw in those situations. And they had the perfect play call. Like Nebraska's in cover 0, so there's not even a deep safety. They had Ruckert matched up on a linebacker who is worried about the run. And he had him beat. I mean, it just Stroud waited too long to throw it. And so he let the guy catch up. The linebacker, or nickel, I should say, made a nice play. And like it would have been a tough catch, but it really should have probably been an easy catch if he releases that as soon as Ruckert's even with them. So again, I guess you can quibble with, should they run there? Should they have done some sort of like play action to the flat or like rub route? I mean, but if you execute that, it's probably a touchdown. So, you can swing it both ways. And I mean, we all try to like impart meaning, and sometimes like football just comes down to like little things going one way or the other.
There was another one of those plays kind of at the other end of the game, very late, where it was the strip sack on CJ Stroud real late in the game. It was, they're trying to be aggressive. That's an opportunity where you could just run the ball and try and kill the clock and just get out of there. But, they had this play called. Sounds like they got the look they wanted, but then there were issues up front. So that sounds like that may be similar to the Ruckert play in a lot of ways. But what did you think of that call? And then what did you see on that play?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like reasonable minds can differ about whether to be aggressive there. If they succeed on it, I bet people probably aren't complaining about it in hindsight. But because it was wide open, and like that's the limitations of the TV cameras. But they basically set up a play where they were Olave was sort of faking, it's a snag concept. So like sort of faking a mini curl, Stroud pumps, and then he cuts to the middle of the field. And like they had the covers they wanted to run it against, like the safety to that side went with the guy going to the corner. And so Olave is he was going to be wide open down the middle, but the pass protection broke down. And obviously then it was exacerbated by Stroud, fumbling. And so didn't work out. And like I think Nicholas Petit-Frere said they had some kind of miscommunication between him and Munford on their slide protection. So again, we're like continue to go back to like the O-line communication and working together, which has been a problem and something that needs resolved. But if they pick that up, it's probably an easy touchdown, and Ohio State wins 30-17, and it doesn't seem as knee knocking and as a poor performance as it may have seemed with that.
Yeah, as you were talking there, I was just thinking, boy, if Holy Buckeye had been knocked down or just a little out of Jim Tressel's getting ripped. Why are you throwing the ball way downfield on 4th-and-1? What are you doing? Got a chance to kick a tying field goal. So yeah, it's that's why they get the big bucks.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's teams are just I do think in those like situations where teams are really trying to guess based on their tendencies, right? And so like it's a sort of a high risk, high reward strategy by defenses. And so you do have to try to punish them in some ways for doing that, like, based on tight end and running back alignment, and like, hey, we're going to be super aggressive on this play, we're going to be super soft on this play. And so, they have to try to break those tendencies in general. And so, but yeah, if you hit any one of those throws, and that's just an area where Stroud needs to improve. I think he's really good on those like mid-range, quick breaking routes, but like throwing the ball down the field, and he can't be really blamed for that one. But the Ruckert one, or there's a couple other with Olave, like he needs to step up in the pocket and deliver it on time.
Well, and I would imagine also by doing that and breaking your tendencies, then you're maybe getting a little bit of a lighter box the next time you've got a 4th-and-1.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're got to make defenses think twice about doing that. And so, even with that failing, it's probably on film, and like, it may make defenses think twice. And, I'm sure they'll have other similar looks, because you can't just bang your head into the wall. The defense can always outnumber you. So it comes down to execution.
Well, Ross, thank you for joining me. Always enjoy these shows. These always get good feedback. So appreciate you joining me this morning.
Happy to, Tom. Thanks.
And you can find Ross's work at BuckeyeScoop.com. He had his article right on the front page there, free for all. You can check that out at BuckeyeScoop.com. You can also find he was on this week's Around the Oval podcast with Alex Gleitman. So you can find that one as well. Wherever you find this, you can find that. Just search for Around the Oval or Buckeye Scoop to find that. Alex does a great job every week. I really enjoy that show. And you can also find all of our other great podcasts wherever you get this one, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. You can also find them on YouTube if you prefer to watch, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. You can subscribe right there, hit that bell. Then you get notified every time we post a new podcast, every time we do a new live show. We'll be doing our usual Friday live show. Tony Gerderman, Kevin Noonan, and I will be doing our usual Friday live show a little later on today, answering your questions. So you can hit that bell and you get notified as soon as we do that. So you can be a part of all that fun. And then tomorrow, pregame, postgame, you know the drill. It's all there. youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.